Hello and welcome to Lecture 1 in Human Biology. Let's hit the ground rolling here and see where we can go. So with that in mind, let's begin here. You know, to do human biology, I feel like we need to have just the most brief of introductions on what biology is as a whole. And that is sort of the goal here. Now, biology is the study of life. Ergo, human biology is the study of human life. What we are going to do in this class is we're going to run through system by system and have an amazing conversation about your body and how the parts and pieces therein function. To do this, we're going to start at a low level. The essence of it is, if you're going to understand how your muscles flex, you first got to understand that your muscles are made out of protein. For you to understand that your muscles are made out of protein, you need to know what macromolecules are, like proteins and fats and lipids, etc. For you to understand these concepts, you got to start even lower and understand the nature of atoms and how they bind to one another. So we're going to have a very brief conversation on how these base level chemical structures are formed, and then we're going to roll into this thing and go system by system all throughout the entirety of your body and learn a great deal about these amazing structures. So with that in mind, let's start right here and just very briefly discuss the characteristics of all living things. Okay? All living things are organized. Organized from the atom up to the biosphere. Again, you, at your lowest level, are made up of atoms. And then you are internally organized, much like the world around us is organized. You are made up of cells. Those cells being compartmentalized and separated from one another. Those cells coming together to form things like tissues. Those tissues come together to form things like organs. You are organized, much like the rest of life on this planet is organized. Number 2, we use materials and energy, in the end, all of which coming from the sun, but at the same time, we simply use materials and energy from our environments. Plants put out their leaves and collect sunlight from the sun and utilize this in order to make sugars to allow their systems to function. You will consume foods that you will utilize to make ATP, adenosine triphosphate, ATP, that is your cellular energy, right? You consume foods to get the energy you need to power the things that you do on a daily basis. Flexing your muscles, walking around the room. If you cut yourself, you have to heal that damage. You're going to be using energy from the foods you consume, using materials from the foods that you consume to heal that wound. We require materials and energy which we consume. Number 3, we have to maintain a relatively constant internal environment. Key term here, folks, homeostasis. That means a state of sameness. A state of sameness. Oh my gosh, your body temperature right now is probably somewhere around 98.6 degrees. And if it varies too much from 98.6 degrees, you'll feel it. When you have a fever, you know it doesn't feel right. Something's not functioning the way it's supposed to function. And what you may not realize is the reason you have that fever is so that the things that are affecting you, a virus, bacteria, can't function as effectively. Whereas your immune system is very good at defending you when your body temperature is elevated. So all of these things happen for a reason. We must maintain homeostasis. If you get too cold or too hot, you can easily die. So we have to maintain an internal state of sameness. The same story with blood sugar. So your resting blood sugar should be somewhere in the neighborhood of about 70 milligrams per deciliter, and you have to maintain that level within very narrow ranges in order to survive. If it goes way up or way down, you can have major problems, and you probably realize that with your cursory knowledge at this stage of things like diabetes, as an example. Where are we at? Number 4, respond to internal and external stimulation. I have 3 children, and if I am walking around on the floor of my house and I step on something sharp, the classic Lego as an example, I will immediately pull my foot up off the ground. That is responding to external stimulation. If I see something potentially dangerous, I might stay away from it. That's responding to external stimuli. Or alternatively, we were just talking about that blood sugar. If my blood sugar goes up too high, I will secrete a hormone called insulin, which will bring my blood sugar back down. That's responding to internal stimuli. All right? So we have hormones in our systems that regulate functions of our bodies. That's responding to internal stimuli. And I'm here to tell you, that's a pretty minor example of this. We constantly respond to both internal and external stimuli. We are living things. Number 5, we must reproduce and grow. If we do not reproduce ourselves, there will be no more people. Ergo, they would not be living things. So we have to have the ability to reproduce ourselves and to grow in order to be considered living. Again, something like a virus, we consider those to be non-living. They are non-cellular and they are not capable of dividing themselves, of reproducing themselves without help from other things. Okay, so they can't do it themselves. They are considered non-living. And then last but not least, number 6, living things all must have the ability to change over time. Oh my gosh, let me tell you. Living things are constantly being augmented by the environments they are placed in. And as a result of that, we are constantly changing ever so slightly. There are many good stories to discuss here, and we will get to those when we talk about how your immune system works. So with that in mind, a nice little introduction on biology. Let's go straight into the major themes of our class. And you'll see slides like this periodically that sort of give you a little bit of a breakdown of what we're going to be doing. I'm just going to go straight into the slide itself. All right, away we go. First things first, let's have some definitions in play here. Number 1, define anatomy. Anatomy is concerned with structure of body parts and geographical relationships among those body parts. Sounds great. Anatomy is the parts and pieces of your body. My hand is anatomy. The cells of my skin, of my respiratory tract, my blood cells, these are anatomy. All right, the parts, the structures that you can see. And we can further name these, like gross anatomy would be large things, okay, large structures visible to the naked eye. We could get smaller and talk histology and cytology. Cytology is the study of individual cells, whereas histology is the study of tissues. And buddy, we could take this way deeper if we so chose, but this is to give you an example of anatomy, the parts and pieces of your body. Comparison to physiology. Physiology is how your body works, the things that you do. So anatomy might be talking about a strand of tropomyosin, a piece of troponin. The physiology is understanding how calcium binds to troponin and how it changes shape to allow for muscle flexion. If anatomy is the parts and pieces, physiology is how it works, how these things do what they do. Yeah, that's perfect. Let's go here. Now, here's the reality of our situation. The anatomy kind of constrains the physiology. In other words, what something looks like sort of dictates what it's capable of doing. My classic example is the hammer and the wrench. You can hammer a nail, you can tighten a bolt with a wrench, but you can't really tighten a bolt with a hammer, and hitting a nail with a wrench only goes so far. Okay, these tools are set up for very specific purposes, and they do those jobs incredibly well, and you will find that your body is similar in this. Bone and tooth, okay? Your bones and your teeth are very similar. If you grind them up into a powder, they look identical. They have very similar chemical makeup. They are almost identical in that facet. But bones and teeth are super different from one another. Your bones are way more flexible than you think. A nice, fresh humerus, man, it can bend a little bit. Whereas a tooth is very hard. Tooth enamel, specifically, is the hardest substance that your body makes. And when things are incredibly hard, like your teeth, like a piece of glass, rather than bending, they shatter. And your teeth have a habit of shattering, given certain circumstances, okay? Whereas bones have far more resilience. They're a little softer. They have a little more give to them. Now, why don't we make bones out of the same thing as teeth? If teeth are so hard, you all know that having strong bones is important. Why not just make your teeth or make your bones out of the same thing as teeth? Because they would fracture constantly, and you would have major problems. Flip side, what if we made our teeth out of the same thing as bone? Well, then your teeth would wear out in years. When you're 20, you'd have no teeth left. And that would not be an ideal situation, I predict, for most of us. The anatomy constrains the physiology. The appearance, the nature of things determines what they are capable of doing. And we can go deeper than this as well. Here we have some tissues, that's histology, with individual cells, that would be cytology. And we can talk about how they approach this theme of anatomy and physiology. This is the lining of a kidney, referred to as Bowman's capsule. This is the lining of a nephron specifically. And if you look, it's got an incredibly thin layer of cells here. Like there's a cell right there. That's the nucleus with the cell around it. Compare that to here. Here's a nucleus, and here's the cell around it. This cell is utterly flat. It is as flat as they come, whereas this cell is incredibly tall by comparison. Can you imagine that this one being utterly flat and these being incredibly tall, that perhaps they may do different things for you? You'd be correct. Your lungs have this incredibly thin tissue as well, and it's to allow you to breathe in and very quickly diffuse oxygen for carbon dioxide, which you then exhale, releasing that carbon dioxide. These very thin tissues are great at letting things move through them very quickly. Very low selective pressure, if you will. Whereas down here, these very tall cells are very selective about what they let through. This is the tissue of your intestines. Your intestines allow you to absorb nutrients into your bloodstream. There's other things that live in your intestines. You have a lot of bacteria that reside in there, and you don't want those in your bloodstream. So this tissue is very thick, so it can be more selective about what it lets into your bloodstream and what it keeps out. The anatomy constrains the physiology. The way it's built determines where it would be found and what it's capable of doing. And I think this is very meaningful for our conversations. Now, if I were you, I would be best friends with the hierarchy of complexity. This is an incredibly important concept to broach here. You are an organism. Those organisms being made up of many organ systems, like your cardiovascular system, you have a urinary system, you have an integumentary system, many systems of the body, this being digestive here. Those systems being made up of individual organs, many organs making up an organ system. Here, like the stomach, those organs being composed of two or more tissues working together for some sort of common goal. Mind you, a tissue, that is studying tissues, histology. Tissues being made up of individual cells, studying cells being cytology. Those cells being made up of individual organelles like mitochondria. You've probably heard of Golgi bodies, nuclei, rough and smooth, endoplasmic reticulum. These would be organelles. Those organelles being made up of macromolecules. Macromolecules are large molecules. Macro means large. That would be things like proteins and nucleic acids and lipids and carbohydrates. Those macromolecules being made up of smaller molecules, and then those smaller molecules being made up of individual atoms. So yet again I say, if we're going to understand the organism, we have to start down here at the atoms, and that's what we will be doing as time progresses here. Now, I think it's meaningful for us to run through the body system by system just very quickly and have a brief understanding of all of these major organ systems. Now, in the duration of this class, we're going to go one by one through these and explain them all in amazing detail. So stay tuned for that. But let's just very briefly explain all of them as we see them at this moment. All right, here we go. So there is an integumentary system. Okay, the integumentary system is made up of things like your skin, your hair, and your nails, and the function of the integumentary system is, generally speaking, protection. It's a wonderful barrier, keeps bad things out. Okay, there's way more to all of these than I will describe, but again, we're giving it the dime tour right now of sort of how this all works. Skeletal system, made up of bones. Your skeletal system assists you with maintaining your bodily structure and the capacity for movement and even protection. So it's keeping your brain and your heart and your lungs safe. Muscular system, being made up of muscles. They allow you to move around, and believe it or not, they generate copious amounts of heat that keeps your body warm. Nervous system, being made up of your brain, your peripheral nerves, sensory receptors, this kind of thing. And your nervous system, let's see, I know a good way to describe this, allows you to sense and respond to stimulation. Kind of takes us back to our the nature of living things, right? We must sense and respond to the world around us and within us. That's what the nervous system does. Next, we have the endocrine system here, which is a little complicated. The endocrine system has its hot little hands in basically everything your body does. But the rub to this is that the parts here are numerous. Your pancreas has some endocrine function. Your thyroid gland, ovaries and testes, pituitary. There's all sorts of glandular tissue here that fall into the realm of the endocrine system. But for my purposes, what these do is they make hormones. All right, the endocrine system makes hormones, and that is a broad statement. We're going to be delving deeply into this as we progress. And then, of course, there is the cardiovascular system here. Cardiovascular system made up of your heart, your blood vessels, and what your cardiovascular system is going to do is it's going to allow for the transport of blood through your system. That's what it does. It sends blood around the system, and the blood is basically a transit mechanism for the body. It's the highway of your body, allowing things to be moved from place to place, like oxygen, like nutrients, like waste products, like hormones. Okay, it's a wonderful transit mechanism. Next, we have the lymphatic system. Now, this one's tough, okay? And it says lymphatic and immune, which is true. Your lymphatic system has a big role to play in the way your immune function works. But the gist of the lymphatic system is as follows. If the cardiovascular system is constantly pumping blood around your body, what you may not realize is the cardiovascular system is constantly leaking out very small amounts of fluid. Fluid called lymph at the end of the day, all right? That fluid leaked out by the cardiovascular system, it doesn't need to just build up in your tissues. You'd end up with all kind of weird swelling, okay? You've probably heard of issues that revolve around swelling. The lymphatic system is responsible for taking excess tissue fluid and bringing it back into the cardiovascular system. It's like a little reverse circulatory system, picking up extraneous fluid and bringing it back in to the cardiovascular system. Pretty darn neat from my perspective. Also, along the way, all this excess tissue fluid is constantly being tested by your immune cells. A lot of these referred to as white blood cells, all right? As this fluid is flowing through the lymphatic system, it's being tested to see if there's anything there that's not supposed to be there. That would be considered immune function, at least one immune function of your body. Next is the respiratory system. The respiratory system is going to be made up of your lungs, your tracheal passages, and what this is going to be doing is simply bringing in oxygen and releasing wastes, or I should say carbon dioxide. There's a lot happening in your respiratory system, but for our purposes, you're going to be bringing in oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide, which is in essence a waste product. The digestive system allows you to bring in nutrients and eliminate waste products, all right? Nutrients that will allow us to grow and develop and do the things that we do. Some organs in play here would be like your stomach, your large and your small intestine. You can even put the esophagus in there. Down here we have the urinary system. Urinary system made up of kidneys, ureters, bladder, and your urinary system is really neat. What the kidneys really do is they bring in blood from all across the body. Blood flows into the kidneys, and the kidneys will purify waste products out of the bloodstream. Works like a charm. Purify waste products out of the bloodstream. So in other words, every time I flex my muscles or use enzymes or do the things that I do, I'm going to have metabolic waste products. Those metabolic waste products will be taken by the kidneys and eliminated as urine, as it were. And then last but not least, male and female reproductive systems. At least half of you should have a really grasp on at least one of these. The rub to this is that we can talk about ovaries and testes, since they are incredibly similar structures. Now, believe it or not, we all have basically the same parts and pieces. They're just in different proportion. So ovaries and testes are incredibly similar, and the purpose of this is to make more of us, to reproduce ourselves. This is yet again a tenet of living things. All right, so with that in mind, let's jump over to organ system integration. Now, an important nuance of how all this fits together is that all of these systems are heavily integrated with one another. So, as an example, your integumentary system sort of keeps everything protected and safe. Your digestive system is bringing in materials and nutrients to power your body. These are entering the bloodstream to be carried wherever they go. These are being used, energy particles being used by cells, oxygen from your lungs entering the blood, being used by your cells to do their metabolic processes. Those metabolic processes producing wastes that enter the bloodstream and flow to your kidneys, to your urinary system to be dealt with. All of these organ systems are endlessly integrated with one another to allow for bodily function. And it works like a charm, okay? All these systems incredibly integrated, working brilliantly. All right, let's go here. Let's talk at length about homeostasis. This is a subject that we've briefly mentioned a little bit earlier, and we're going to talk about it more now. The idea is that homeostasis for your body is a state of sameness internally. That's what all of this is doing, is helping you maintain a state of internal sameness, a state of homeostasis. We have already talked about body temperature. Your body temperature doesn't shift around very much because you're constantly working to keep it around 98.6 degrees, and you know this. Because if you get cold, you might shiver. And as you know, shivering, that would be muscle flexion. Muscle flexion generates heat to raise your body temperature. That's why you shiver. And if you get incredibly hot, your blood will begin to pump massive quantities of blood. Hang on, let me try again. If you get hot, your cardiovascular network will send massive quantities of blood into your skin surface, activating your sweat glands, cooling you off. So these are homeostatically regulated. Now, a point to be made, these are regulated in lots and lots and lots of different ways, but your nervous system and endocrine system are very involved in this. So your nervous system can determine where blood flows in your body, as can your endocrine system play a role in this. So when you release adrenaline into your bloodstream, you're going to be amped up and ready to roll. An adrenaline rush, you've heard the terminology before. That is an endocrine function. What that's going to do is it's going to send massive quantities of blood into your muscles, so that your muscles are incredibly active and ready to have a fight or a flight. You may have heard of a fight or flight situation in the past. Now, a point to be made here is that your body temperature is never going to be a perfect 98.6 on a moment-to-moment basis. Okay, if you measure your body temperature in the morning, you're going to be a little cool. If you measure it when you're very active, you'll be a little hot. Okay, but it's going to average out to be around 98.6. The idea here is that homeostasis keeps things in a narrow range. All right, in a narrow range. So 98.6 might be the average, but it might go up a little or down a little, just depending upon what you're doing at the time. Same thing with blood sugar levels. You know, around 70 milligrams per deciliter is a good average. Some people might be a little lower than that on average. Some people might be a little higher than that on average. All of these will fall into the concept of homeostasis, maintaining a narrow range, what I like to call, in a good term set, dynamic equilibrium. So it's going to be around a set point. It's going to vary a little bit. Your body will keep things at this stage. We could even talk about like your blood oxygen levels. When your blood oxygen levels begin to dip, you're going to have an instinctive drive to breathe. Okay? And when you're sitting down resting, not doing much, you're going to breathe slowly because you just don't need a lot of oxygen. But if you were to get up and start running laps around the building you're in right now, solid chance you're going to start breathing faster to get more oxygen. Okay? And at the end of the day, it's still a homeostatic function. That's maintaining a narrow range and your body taking steps to keep you in that narrow range. Right? Homeostasis, an internal state of sameness, a very important concept for human biology. Let's go here. This is a wonderful way of describing body temperature variation. We like to see these cycles like this, and what this is going to fall into the realm of is what we like to call a negative feedback loop. So you got to think about feedback in mere moments. All right, here we go. In your body, there is some sort of control center that's constantly monitoring every aspect of your body. You might think of this as your brain. It's more complex than that, but we can just stick with the brain at the moment. Let's say that you go out in a very cold environment. Here's my little dog and my wife. This is before children. You can tell because we're so well rested here. When you go out in a very cold environment, your body temperature is going to drop. And receptors in your body will detect this drop in temperature and send a message to your brain. Now, here's an important point and something you need to know. These receptors will send what we call afferent messages. Afferent messages are sent to a control center which determines some sort of set point, like your body temperature, 98.6 degrees. That control center will then send an efferent message out to an effector. Efferent goes to an effector to bring things back in homeostatic balance. You get cold. Receptors in your body detect this cold situation. Send a message to your brain. Your brain responds to this by telling your muscles to shiver. You shiver, warming your body up. Do you notice how in this something went up or down, but in this case, up or down for cold here. And then your body took steps to bring it back up. Or if you were to go out and eat some donuts, your blood sugar would rise, get too high. So your body takes steps to bring it back down. All of these examples of homeostasis I've presented you with, all of them are examples of negative feedback loops. Negative feedback. Something goes up, your body takes steps to bring it back down. Negative feedback. You have something go down, your body takes steps to bring it back up. It's negative feedback. It's a lot like the thermostat in your place. Okay, you set it at 70 degrees, and it's really cold outside. So the temperature goes from 70 to 69, 68, then the heat comes on, raises it up to 70, 71. Then it goes back to 69, 68. Heat comes on, brings it back up. It's negative feedback. Your body does this all the time. Now I'm going to give you a couple terms here, just so you can understand this just a wee bit better. My terms are vasoconstriction and vasodilation. Okay, vasoconstriction and vasodilation. To constrict means to get smaller. So vasoconstriction is to constrict your vessels, your blood vessels. Whereas vasodilation, to dilate, means to get larger. Vasodilation means to make your blood vessels get larger. When you are hot, you will vasodilate the blood vessels that go to your skin surface, causing you to sweat. Okay? More blood into your skin means activating your sweat glands. You begin to sweat. By comparison, if you get cold, you will vasoconstrict the blood vessels going to your skin surface to help hold the heat inside your body. That's why one of the first places you tend to notice cold is like in your nose or your fingers or your toes, because you're cutting off blood flow to the skin in those areas, and those thinner parts of the body tend to get cold as a result of that, because they don't have a blanket of warm blood flowing around them any longer. Vasoconstriction, to get smaller, to decrease the amount of blood flow, in this case to the skin. Vasodilation, to increase the diameter of a blood vessel, increasing blood flow to the skin. This is one of the ways that we help to regulate our core body temperature. vasodilation and vasoconstriction. Shivering when you're very cold, sweating when you're very hot. All right, good. Let's go here. And then there is positive feedback in the world around us, and this is a meaningful thing to discuss, so let's knock it out real quick. Well, hang on, let me explain positive feedback first. So if negative feedback is something going up and your body taking steps to bring it back down, positive feedback is something going up and your body pushing it even further. Okay? Something dips and your body really shoves it to the ground. Okay? Positive feedback is the opposite of negative feedback. And there aren't really that many positive feedback examples in the human body. In fact, all of what I will discuss here are trying to keep you alive. So there can be positive feedback if you look at things on the right time scale, and only that short term. Okay? A wonderful example of this is blood clotting. If you cut yourself, the way that you will stop the bleeding is by having a bunch of platelets pile into the area of damage and block blood flow from being able to escape. When you cut yourself, platelets will pile into the area of damage, clogging up the damaged area, preventing blood loss. And you know this because you've cut yourself before, and it drip, 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 stop, right? The idea is that platelets clog the area of damage. How do they do this, you might ask? Well, when you damage a blood vessel, the platelets sense that there is damage and they get sticky. So then a platelet will stick to the area of damage in that blood vessel. That platelet will then call for help. And it will send out messages that more platelets will pick up and get sticky and stick to that platelet. And then those two platelets start releasing all these chemicals that stimulate for more platelets to come in and stick in. And then those new platelets start sending out for more platelets, and then they come in and stick in. And then more and more and more and more platelets, positive feedback. More platelets means even more platelets until the damage is sealed. There's no more blood loss. And the wound can begin to heal. On the right time scale, that looks like positive feedback because a few platelets means there's going to be even more a-coming, okay? On a short term, that's positive feedback. And pregnancy and delivery specifically is also involved in this conversation. So you may have heard of someone being induced into labor. When we induce someone into labor, what we're doing is we're giving them a chemical called Pitocin that stimulates uterine contractions. The body also makes something along these lines naturally. This naturally produced chemical is called oxytocin. This is a hormone made by the endocrine system in the brain. Okay? What will happen is the kid's head pushes against the cervix from the back side here, pushes against the cervix, which causes a nervous stimulation that arrives at the brain saying, hey, make oxytocin. So the brain makes a little bit of oxytocin. And that little bit of oxytocin flows through the bloodstream, reaching the uterus. And what oxytocin does is it tells the uterus to contract ever so slightly. That minor contraction pushes the kid's head against the cervix, which sends a nervous transmission to the brain, which causes the brain to release more oxytocin, which arrives at the uterus, causing a stronger uterine contraction, which pushes the kid's head against the cervix, which sends us a message to the brain, which causes the brain to release more oxytocin, which causes an even stronger uterine contraction. If you've never had kids or been around such a thing, when you go to the hospital having contractions, one of the things they ask you is how far apart are they? Because that tells us how far along you are until delivery is going to actually happen. Because as this system ramps up, more pressure means more of a signal to the brain, means more oxytocin, means more pressure, which means more of a message to the brain, which means more oxytocin is ramping up and ramping up and ramping up, and uterine contractions are happening closer and closer together until we enter developmental biology. We have a new baby on our hands, and delivery has ceased. This, on the right time scale, is positive feedback. A little bit of oxytocin leads to a lot more oxytocin, leads to lots of oxytocin, because this cyclic process, which I've just described to you. Positive feedback. All right, that's going to be the end of our first little section. And our next section is going to be Chapter 2, The Chemical Basis of Life.